Someone asked me the other day, what's your favorite photograph you've ever taken? I have no idea. That's a tough question because I've been shooting for over 40 years. How do I answer that? But I thought about it and decided to have a look through some of my archives because I was curious. And as I looked, pulling out images that really appealed to me, I realized that there was one common theme throughout, through a very large portion of them anyway. The images that I was finding really interesting and pleasing were the ones that had subframing. As I looked through my images, I realized I was using it all the time, like here at Charles Bridge in Prague. Everyone shoots this famous bridge, so I decided to step back and use the archway as a frame to create something more interesting. Not only did this add another visual layer, it added another layer to the story because it shows some ornate detailing that so many people fail to notice. With subframing, you're using a visual element within the composition to create another frame, and that could be the archway, it could be a doorway, a window, it could be people, it could be leaves of a tree, it could even be shadows. This technique helps guide the viewer's eye to exactly where you want it to go. It adds structure to a scene, intention, creates context, and maybe most importantly of all, it can create depth. Here I use carriages to frame St. Paul's, and this is probably one of my all-time favorite photos actually. I love the composition and the colors, and the framing makes this photo unique, and most of all, it gives it tons of depth. A strong image very often has a foreground, midground, and background, and introducing subframing very quickly builds those layers. Instead of everything sitting on one flat plane, you're creating separation. You're giving the viewer something to move through, which makes the image feel immersive, like you're stepping into it, not just looking at it. When doing travel and urban photography, the obvious place to start is by using doorways and windows, framing your subject through them, and you're instantly adding context and depth. For landscape photography, we can use rocks and branches. I used leaves to frame this shot of a Land Rover in a forest. And you don't always need to use physical objects. You can use light and shade, which is something many street photographers do. I'm always experimenting, looking for new ways to use framing to make a photo more interesting. It's important that the framing that you choose supports the main subject and not competes with it. You need to be careful that your framing isn't more interesting than the main subject because, well, it's just going to be confusing and people won't know where to look. Here I chose to frame my subject with a background instead of a foreground. It can work that way too. You've still got layers and the framing is still boxing in the main subject and making it pop. It's best to keep things simple and ask yourself what the framing you use is actually adding to the photo. In this photo, there are no layers, there is no depth as such, but the window frame in the ice cream van still does the same job. It helps draw the eye by framing the main subject, the main interaction that's going on. When I shoot food, I often frame my subject with things that support that recipe, for example, like ingredients, and this shows context and it helps to tell a little bit of a story. Sometimes we might find a really interesting frame but no subject and wait for a subject to walk into the frame. This is a very common scenario with street photographers who are anticipating and not just composing. Subframing is a very easy technique to use, and I think it's also very good because it makes you slow down, makes you stop and look, assess the scene in front of you and figure out a more interesting way to make it work. What's really good is when you start using this technique, you start thinking more creatively and your photos do become much better, different from the same snapshots everyone else takes. Yeah, photos that are more considered, that are more intentional. So why not give it a try? Why not head out and shoot through some frames and see how quickly those compositions become a little bit more interesting. Thanks for watching.